We're recording, Amos. We're recording.
Yeah, good to be back.
Yeah,
Good to
Amos.
see you.
Good to see you again. So you were telling me about Twitter.
Yeah, I was reading that Twitter, I guess, has sort of suspended their on-location operations definitely, and they're going to get their employees to be like working from home. Perhaps like forever. They're never going to go back to their places of work, and they're just going to be, a work from home business from now on. Um, if I was reading the article correctly, that is. And people were just saying that, yeah, this is going to have a huge impact on the future of the tech business, on commercial real estate, and development of commercial real estate. Because if tech companies just have people working from home and just being
Mm.
straight correspondence, it'll change things quite a bit.
You won't have you'll have less and less businesses needing space for office.
Yeah, and there might not be. I mean, like I'm sure Silicon Valley would continue, but it might not be as central as it is now for the development of technology. And the same could be said for other sorts of tech-based businesses.
Mm. Well, that's actually kind of crazy if you think about like Twitter
Yeah.
saying. I wonder if any other businesses, any other tech companies have come out saying that. Do you know?
Not that I know of. I've not been checking up on it today. We only talked about this yesterday, I think.
Yeah.
So
Because
yeah.
if you think about Twitter, Twitter is one of the biggest tech companies out there, and then them announcing, hey, you guys don't have to come back to the office if once the economy's open up, you don't have to come back to the office.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Before COVID, like the situation before COVID.
Yeah. I'm sure it's going to change the way that the way that we do our business from now into the future.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, correspondence work will become much more prominent, just like correspondence school will be.
That will be. It's gonna. I'm sure it's gonna take some time adjusting still. Because right now most people are thinking, oh yeah, this is I'm working from home temporarily,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna go back in a few months.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll take a lot of time to adjust, but I think it's also kind of necessary, right? Like, the economy is not doing well. People are talking, we're heading into a recession. We're almost definitely heading into a recession, and it's likely that we may even head into a depression, depending on how long the quarantine lasts. And being able to have the technology to continue to work correspondence, that can also take away the overhead for businesses,
Hmm.
and so that can be it could be a way to bounce back financially, just to take away this huge cost of having
Having it
centralized
moved, right?
locations. And yeah,
Uh,
there's benefits to it anyway.
there's this company that that I follow, and I think the company's name is Spatial, SPATIAL, Spatial.
Hmm.
And what they do is they have um, well, how would you use it? It's basically Skype, but virtual VR Skyping, augmented reality Skyping.
Okay.
So they, I think you get scanned. So you get scanned,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
like your body gets scanned, and then it creates like a 3D version of you. And
Yeah, I
so when
know
you
this
go into this,
company.
yeah, when you go into that VR set, then say you and I are talking, like this, except let's say we're in the VR set, I would be able to see you like a augmented version of Amos, and we'd be able to
Hmm.
like move around in the room, and then we have like a common table where we are say you and I are doing a project. We can like point at this, but we're not in the same room.
Yeah.
It was like it's kind of crazy just thinking about how far we've come. It's like
Yeah.
Star Trek.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to get that app and then see if you can do some mods to like the physics in virtual reality or whatever, and just mess around a bit.
Like you just float around as you're
Yeah.
talking. Oh man, yeah. I you know what? So like a few years ago when VR was starting, I was thinking, man, it would be so crazy if a company came up with a way to do exactly what Spatial is now doing,
Mm.
and now and then I mean, like I'm sure there are companies out there who are now just like it started or have started thriving precisely because of COVID. Like Zoom, for example,
Hmm.
they're doing so well. I'm so spatial. I think we'll just do really really well unless someone else comes in.
Yeah.
There's so many companies that are like, oh wow, this is the best time for us to be around.
Yeah. Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts. Yeah.
Yeah, Microsoft Teams, Slack is something that like so many people use.
Yeah. I'm sure Jeff Bezos is doing well.
Oh yeah, I was reading that. I just read a headline somewhere. It said Jeff Bezos made $1 trillion during this time, which I don't know how likely that is,
Yeah.
um, but it was just people talking about how Jeff Bezos is some of his workers felt mistreated by having to, obviously people are still ordering on Amazon.
Hmm.
We're still getting our stuff from Amazon. So they're like, there are people. I guess there are workers that can't really work from home.
Yeah.
Possible to work for them to work from home.
Yeah.
The plumbers, electrician, those are like
Grocery store
essential
workers. Yeah.
grocery store workers. The Yeah. What do you think about that though? With the grocery store workers,
What do you
it
mean?
just seems like they're like the highest risk takers in one sense because they're coming in contact with so many people every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a sense that they're the higher risk takers. But I mean, frontline medical staff are definitely being exposed to it on a daily basis. And, if someone is showing symptoms, they won't go out to a grocery store. Well, ideally, they won't. But yeah, I guess there's not the same safety precaution taken in grocery stores as there are in medical centers where people are suited up from head to toe.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah. What do you think though will happen from now for the like the future with like in terms of businesses, um, in terms of how people interact with one another? Will
Yeah,
there be less?
I mean, I think a lot of people have been ordering their groceries online and they just go to the store and have somebody comes out from the store to bring it to their car. And so I think that might pick up a bit more. People are just going to become more germophobic. But yeah, it's really hard to tell what the future of business will be because we're not through this yet.
Mm,
And it's hard to see if we're going to be coming out the other side. Just with our lockdown has been extended. Well, our state of emergency has been extended, even though some businesses are going to be going back to work. Um, yeah, hard to say. Like I think just getting back to the whole Twitter moving its people
mm,
to work from home indefinitely. Um, like I think with that, there might actually be a lot of long-term benefits if that's the way the tech business goes.
mm.
Um,
What kind
because
of benefits are you thinking?
yeah, I guess a number of people have written just about how, um, like with towards the end of the 20th century, 70s, 80s, 90s, um, a lot of companies, like a lot of small towns in the central United States and in central Canada, were they had production-based economies. Everyone worked in factories,
Mm,
cars were made. Different sort of industrial production was sort of the predominant employment in a lot of these areas. And with different economic deals, a lot of our production has moved overseas, and those places don't really have any jobs and nothing to sustain them. So people talk about the Rust Belt.
mm.
You've got the American Rust Belt. But, there's a Canadian Rust Belt as well around
Where's our
Eastern
Canadian Rust
Ontario.
Belt?
Um,
Like London,
yeah, London is a place. Peterborough has slowed down.
Edinburgh. Mm,
Um, a lot of small towns in Eastern Ontario, like Brockville and Cornwall,
mm,
and some of these other places were factory towns, but most of the factories have moved away.
mhm.
And yeah, I know there's some other ones, um, sort of west of Toronto, up in um, up in the area where your wife's family comes from.
Mhm. So are you saying that are you saying that with the benefits would be that as people are able to
Yeah,
work from home,
Yeah, well, just so with the slowing down of production, people are forced to find other jobs, and the jobs that are left in North America aren't labor work, but they're knowledge work. So people end up having to go to schools. Schools are predominantly, in coastal cities or in big cities, around the Great Lakes or whatever. There's
You're
other
talking schools like
exceptions.
universities.
Universities,
University.
colleges, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, people move there and they don't end up going back to their small towns because there's not knowledge work in their small towns.
Mm,
And so there's a complete brain drain. um, all the young people leave. They're not bringing money back into these small towns,
mm,
and there's just not jobs there. And so, there's just sort of like a wreckage left in these towns. They all, they've all developed like serious drug problems. Like I know in the Rust Belt in the States,
mhm.
serious problems with like crystal meth, fentanyl, and like the opioid crisis is hitting
Yeah.
those towns hardest, and it is in Canada as well. Like to a lesser extent, I
Yeah.
think, but it's still hitting the towns in Canada.
Yes, you would definitely have people
So
going back, right? Like if you could work
yeah,
from home, you would go back
well,
to a town that you might want to settle, and then the money you make you being put towards that economy.
yeah. I mean, it's a possibility that people might move back home with things becoming a bit more decentralized. But I was thinking more just in the long term, there'd be less of a motivation to leave if school and work is moving
Oh,
on and
okay,
knowledge work is moving online.
okay.
So people would stay and contribute to their local economies, and
They don't
they'd
have to leave.
slowly be able to recover. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, yeah. That would be a benefit because you would have because right now, if you go if you travel even just like within Ontario and you travel around the small towns,
Mhm.
you can definitely feel, you can definitely see that like little is happening, little to nothing is happening to some of these towns.
Yeah.
But some of these towns like are located right next to maybe not the Great Lakes, but a lake,
Yeah.
nevertheless, and they're beautiful. So I wonder if people will be like, well, if I no longer have to work from home, I no longer have to commute. Why would I live in the city and pay, extremely high rent, um, buy a house that is maybe too small for me? Why not move to, I'm trying to think of a small town like Maynooth. Maynooth is a small town.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Move to Maynooth, get a very nice big house, build a nice big house, have internet.
Maynooth, Ontario, that is.
Yeah, Maynooth, Ontario, not Maynooth, Ireland.
Yeah.
um, yeah, that would be so interesting. Do you think it would be there would be a revival of some sort of localism with working
I
from home if it becomes
yeah.
more normal?
I kind of hope so. I think it would be a lot healthier in many ways well, I mean, for our economic life and just our social life in general. Um, I think you told me one time about this experiment that people did with overpopulation in rats.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're the one
That
who
was
told me about
such
it.
a
So,
weird. Yeah, what is it called? What's that experiment called? Calhoun experiment, the Calhoun mice experiment.
mm,
And that experiment was Hugh Hunter told me about that experiment. It was basically I think his name John Calhoun wanted to see what would happen if we treated mice like we treat people in cities where they're like overcrammed, but you have a ton of food, ton of resources, but everyone's kind of stuck together and everyone's in everyone's space. And then the experiment basically, what happened was, um, he created this space where like a ton of rats. So like basically, like you can find this on YouTube, John Calhoun rat mice experiment. I keep saying rat mice experiment, and they're
mm,
like stacks of like what looks like apartments that the mice live in. It's fairly big, and the first I don't know how many first period there was like an explosion in rat um, population. It's like this massive spike. Like everyone is having sex. All the rats are mating. They're eating as much food as they want. They're going around, sleeping around, doing all that stuff. But then it kind of hits a peak. And when it hits a peak, things start to go really, really odd. They're the more of these mice start, socially isolating themselves from the rest of the population. They're like living in the corners, um, not interacting. And as this goes on, like he does this for a few generations, and there was a generation that came after the first generation with this experiment, and they were called I forget what they were called. think they were called the something ones, the chosen ones, or the special ones, or the angelic ones, or something like that. Where these ones, they were like, they looked very intelligent. You know, they would
Hmm.
like look at the other mice and look like they were um, kind of analyzing them, but John Callan said they were basically just stupid mice. They didn't know how to interact. Uh, but yeah, anyways, when the population hit the peak, all this weird thing starts happening, and even though there was plenty of food and plenty of space, the mice started attacking each other, and some even started inflicting harm on themselves. You know, like self harm. They would start biting their tails off. Other mice will bite others' tail, and they just kind of kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting.
Yeah.
There was an increase in homosexuality within the mice population. And so as the population decreased, he thought, okay, maybe what's going to happen is once we get to that base level that we started off with, everything will be normal. But it didn't. Every single mice died in that experiment.
Hmm. Interesting.
But
So
he
if
never made any like claims about, like, he never said, oh, this is what's happening to the cities. He just kind of left it for his
yeah,
readers to decide.
yeah, and there's I think there are a lot of overlap between like rat and mice neurochemistry and just basic levels of psychology with human. But I'd be interested to know like how much of that does carry over.
Mm,
Uh, these big cities do make people insane. Like
I
there's
think
a lot
so.
of strange behaviors that you'd find in big cities that you wouldn't find in small towns. But at the same time, a lot of backward behavior in small towns that you wouldn't find in big
Why do you
cities.
think that is? What do you think it is that with like small towns there's more? I don't know what the word I'm gonna. Excuse me. I want to use this, but small towns there seems to be more a hill. I mean, hillbilly culture. I think that's the best way to put it.
Right.
Is it that there's a? Is it that the cultural development hasn't caught up, um, even though everyone has access to the internet in the small towns, or is it that it's just older people who don't use the internet and then you know?
Yeah, I think ideas definitely move faster in big cities. I don't want to disparage people in small towns. Like,
Yeah,
there's often a lot more virtue in small towns than there are in cities. But
I'm
yeah,
thinking of
what
like
exactly?
super small town. I'm thinking of like when I say small town, I should clarify. I am thinking
Yeah,
of, because I'm reading J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, the book,
right.
and like that book is just absolutely crazy.
Oh, like some of the stories.
Some of the stories.
Yeah. His friend Chris Arnad wrote a book called Dignity.
Dignity.
That
Okay,
yeah,
that's the book.
and he tends, I think he emphasizes the virtue of people in back row America, these
Hmm.
flyover country, left behind towns. Um, life sucks for them, but they've been able to establish community that people
Better
in big
community,
cities,
right?
yeah,
They tend to have, in small towns, you tend to have a stronger community, a stronger sense of community than if you live in big cities.
yeah, I think so. And I grew up in a small town, and yeah, I prefer much of my life in small towns to city life.
Yeah, I think now, if it becomes the norm that people are more and more, you're able to work from home and do lots of things from home. If you could do a majority of the work that you do from home, I don't see why you wouldn't want to live in a small town.
Yeah,
I mean, despite the fact that you probably would have less access to like certain amenities. You might
right,
not have the best internet. My sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, they live in a small town, and they have, like, they just put in internet. Like,
right.
Bell just came to their area. They live on a farm, which is like, man, we're in 2020. You would think that the internet problem would face, the village that my dad's from in India, but it's happening here. So it always surprises me.
Mhm. Yeah, but I mean, pretty far. They're pretty far out. Like I think they bought a farm. Yeah, I don't remember their exact situation, but
But yeah,
when I'm thinking small towns, I'm thinking like established small little urban centers,
mm,
10,000, 20,000 type of people that service a greater like farming area.
mm, mm. Do you think though with culture, um, how would you like it's how would you don't want to be in a small town where they are, let's just that they are racist towards people who don't look like them there. This
No,
is applicable to any small town around the world.
yeah,
But at the same time, one reason why they're like that is because of familiarity. You know,
mm, yeah, I think maybe,
like new people, you don't know what they are. You're always kind of strange towards them. Right now, I think it's a bit easier now um with kind of segregating yourself with people who don't
yeah,
look like you, because it's there's lots of people everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah. What were you going to say?
um, yeah. No, never mind. I was just gonna say, like I think there's a lot more that goes into the like the sociology of racism and in group out group sort of preferences. I mean, that definitely is a part of it, but like some small towns do a really good job at welcoming newcomers. Um, that's some of my experience on the East Coast, anyway.
Hmm. But are you welcomed are you welcomed as part of the tribe?
Like it always takes a while to become like you need to develop some history.
Hmm. Because I'm thinking of I forget what's that, not New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, what's that island? Prince Edward Island, right? Prince Edward
Yeah.
Island. We've heard stories of friends who used to live at Prince Edward Islands, um, and they told us about how when they lived there, they had their kids were born there. Uh, they were never they were always considered outsiders, even though they had their kids were born there, and then the kids, even when the kids were growing up in school, they were considered outsiders because they weren't from the island. And they told us a story once of how one of their friends had been there, I think 2 generations. So their
Mhm.
kids, and then like the kids' parents, like our friend's friend, they were born there, but their parents weren't. They came from like mainland, somewhere from the mainland, and the locals there, they didn't mistreat them. Like they weren't mistreated, but they weren't considered as part of uh, from the island. They weren't from the island, and which is just it's just so strange to me that people are still like that.
Yeah. 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 I think it is. Yeah, it's a bit strange. You hear about stuff like that with someone was telling me my brother's friend moved to Japan, and was expressing like similar things where, oh yeah, you could live here for decades, but you'd never be considered part of the
Japanese.
in group there,
Mm.
and even yeah, yeah. Anyway, just back to some of the small town things. I
Yeah.
think that there's more of a sense of tradition in some of the small towns. Like
Mm.
culture does seem to move a bit quicker. People are more, um, yeah. There's certain practices that maybe hold on longer in small towns, and some of the benefits of businesses potentially moving back to small towns
Mm.
is more of a sense of like cultural continuity. Um,
What do you mean cultural continuity?
so, like for example, if I listen to some of my parents' music from the 70s, like 60s, 70s, I don't actually I feel like I understand it. It feels like it's from a different
The
country.
bygone era.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean you don't understand? Like you don't understand the lyrics, or you don't understand? the
why it's
sentiment.
appealing. Yeah.
Oh, what are you thinking of? What music are you thinking of?
Um, I don't know, some of the strange like alt rock and like progressive rock that
Yeah.
my dad is into. Um, but yeah, I think that just with culture moving so quickly, it can also stunt our intellectual engagement in some ways. And just to
Mm,
sort of develop the music example, like in the 20th century, the way that we think about tonality has developed very quickly. And, there's also a sense of a loss of our connection with the tradition of classical music. And so we don't actually understand, um, I'm not a music theorist, but say, the semantics of tonality. So, if you move from, if you play a certain melody, maybe it signified something. It was associated with sadness or happiness at a
mm,
particular point in our history. Um, but where, the way that we use tones has changed. We just don't have the understanding that we did at one point.
mm. Is it? Yeah, I do wonder. Well, if if we were to transport, if we could time travel and bring back, Mozart, and then tell him, "Yo, this is like the most happening song right now," what he
Yeah,
would say, and be like, okay, take me back." Like, you really do wonder why it is that we find pop music so appealing. It's not like everyone. Maybe everyone has bad taste in music, but I don't know if that's entirely true. But pop music, and there seems to be like a certain kind of music, particularly that will always hit like the top five. It's like it almost always stays the same, like same tones and same kind of lyrics and
right. Because it's all written by like two people.
right.
I think
Well,
it's like I think it's two Swedish guys who write all the top 40 hits.
do you remember what their names are?
I don't.
Yeah, I forget. I think my brother-in-law was telling me about that. He was like, "Yeah, it's written by these two guys, and they've made like 80% of all top hits or something, and
Yeah.
which is it's just crazy. I
Mhm.
mean, you got to be very good to do that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, the other thing that is interesting, I think, with the culture thing is obviously, um, if you have, if city folks, if current city folks eventually start moving back to the city, to the small towns, there's going to be like a cultural, what is it? A cultural clash that happens with like old town culture. I mean, like small town culture and like city folk culture,
Yeah. Potentially.
and you
I
have that.
mean,
What?
yeah. I feel like a tension sometimes. Like I went off to university in a big city, a big city in Toronto, and I came back to live with my with my parents for a number of months after,
Yeah,
and yeah, it felt kind of bizarre, and I think
like living, like you mean bizarre as in like this town felt bizarre, like the mannerism of the
well,
town, or
yeah, you develop new habits, and those habits are very particular to living in a city. And you come back and you can't have the same habits. You don't make the same sort of assumptions in conversations, and yeah, so I think perhaps there would be a clash, but yeah, I don't think too many people will be moving back to small towns any too quickly.
anytime soon.
Yeah, like I don't think the market would be ideal for that. Like people aren't, it's not a seller's market. People lose quite a bit of value if they sell when the economy is in a slump.
Mm, mm. Um, uh, what? Okay, so the what's his name? Um, what's the idea of like the Catholic social teaching? What is it called?
I'm not sure which
Like,
one you're
like
thinking of
so,
in particular,
like the one that G.K. Chesterton espoused.
or like
Is it Catholic social?
distributism.
Yeah.
So
How
that,
is
yeah,
it?
that's,
Yeah, go for it.
go ahead.
I was just going to ask how. I was just thinking about that. Is it? is it quite different than, like, how different is it from um let's let's just say socialism? Like, how different is it?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, G.K. Chesterton is an interesting character.
Is a
And
hardcore socialist.
no, so he, like, distributism was meant to be his take, his interpretation of Catholic social teaching that was developed by, Leo the 13th. And he's also looking back to older figures like, Augustine, Aquinas, and other people who had really thought through, um, issues in political philosophy. So, like, a large part of distributism is like a localism. Um, the idea. So he thinks that big business and big government are very similar in the way that they take over people's lives. So, yeah, he was critical of, what he saw as the tendency in capitalism to have the market just dominated by, um, you know billionaires who sit on top of monopolies, um, and prevent, like, local owners from being able to provide for themselves. Like, a big part of it is humans are free and rational creatures, and part of what that means is that we have, like, we have a responsibility to provide for ourselves. Um, so he thinks that people should, if people own a business, um, I'm sorry, if people, like, own land, they should be able to provide their own food. Um, like, businesses shouldn't be private corporations, but should be, like, collectives.
Mm.
So if you're a mechanic, right? Maybe you should own your own tools and your own way of earning your own living. If you work for, like, a bigger corporation, you should own shares in the corporation. Um, but you should have some ownership in the business, and, its flourishing should be your flourishing. You shouldn't just be a wage slave.
Oh, so would it be similar to, like, within tech companies? If you work for a tech company, I think they give you, as part of, I don't know if it's an option or if it's like compulsory, but you get, you can, um you own part of the, like, the company, and then you can't sell until like a certain amount of time or something. Would
Yeah,
it be something similar to that?
I mean, that's probably a positive step in the right direction. Um, but he wants people to be, like, part of localism is people need to be creative and come up with their own solutions to figure out very particular problems.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I like the owner operated small business seems to be his ideal.
Okay. um there are, you know what's like, when I was in the States, and you go around, when you're driving through, the difference that I noticed the most, and I don't know if you noticed, because I know that you like to go down to the States to get stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds like, to get stuff sounds like drugs. I'm not talking about drugs.
No, you talk, well, cheap beer.
Yeah. But there's something that I do notice a big difference between Canada and the States, is that when you're in the state, sorry, when you're in Canada, you don't see as much small businesses. You know, you see a lot of, like, what do you call those things? Chains, or
Box
uh,
stores. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas if you go down to the States, it'll be like, it's family owned, because the sign's not that great. You know, and even in LA, it was the same. Obviously you're driving in LA, and you're like, man, the only image I have of LA is just for watching all the movies, right? And it's like
Mm.
always cool looking. But then when you're actually driving around LA, you see a lot of these, like, small businesses, and I was actually quite surprised to see that. So I did wonder why it is that in Canada I don't know if it's because I don't think it's harder to start a business in Canada than it is in the US.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You would have more, um, there's a greater social net here, like, if you failed,
Right.
than if you failed in the States.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
there's
I'm I'm not too sure.
There's no health care. I mean, universal. They don't have universal health care. Everyone owns guns. Bit more terrible. There's a oh man, I was a friend of mine messaged me and he was like, because I think I was telling him, it's like, oh yeah, did you read the gun the bans the gun bans that the
Mhm.
liberal government did here in Canada, Justin Trudeau's. Um, so I was talking to him and he was like, yeah, man, most of the guns that were on it were already banned, and so this list is kind of stupid. And so I was like, oh okay, I look and then I was on Twitter, and I've only gotten on Twitter more so because of you, and you keep telling me about all these people on Twitter. So, anyways, I got on Twitter.
Yeah.
I've been scrolling Twitter, and I come across this company. Like someone retweeted it, and I think, and they were like, "Yeah, thanks Trudeau," or something. And it's it's the a screenshot of the
Yeah.
list of the guns that were banned, and it was just like circled around. Thanks for banning us was the retweet, and I was like, what? So I clicked in,
It's
and
called
it's a
like
coffee
shotgun
company.
coffee. Yeah, shotgun coffee or something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What was it called? Black Rifle Company. I think that's what it's called. So I
Right.
was like, this can't be real. This has to be fake. Like, there's no way they banned a coffee company. So I went and searched for the list,
And it
and
was there.
it was there.
Yeah.
So I mean, whoever did the copy editing for that is probably fired.
Yeah, probably. Well, maybe not. The government has sort of been swamped ever since COVID sort of took things over. And, they they're passing laws quicker than the government institutions meant to enact those laws can keep up.
Hmm.
So with some of the, there's sort of a stimulus package where people are able to get COVID relief benefits. So, if you're laid off or if your business is struggling, you're able to get some government funding. But there's like all sorts of contradictions in the ways that you can apply it. Um, if one person applies one way, someone else could apply another way, and
What do you mean?
um, so yeah, someone I
Like,
know
yeah,
applied through Service Canada,
okay,
and they get $2,000 a month to
yeah,
keep them afloat while they're unemployed. Somebody else applied through the CRA, and the one who applied through Service Canada needs to fill out like weekly reports saying that, yeah, I'm still out of the job, and that's the only way that they're able to get their money. And somebody else doesn't have to do any of that; it just goes automatically until they contact CRA and tell them, yeah, I'm back to work. Um, some people need, to give your tax information from last year in order to apply. Other people don't. And yeah, so there's those sorts of inconsistencies. But in the, in some of the way that these things were enacted, there's also inconsistencies, like what businesses can be open.
that is very
Um,
strange. Why do you think that alcohol is considered an essential business?
um, I really don't know. People see it as part of their diet. Um, it's really
I
not that essential. I don't quite understand it.
Someone was telling us that
It's for mental
maybe,
health.
yeah, that's exactly what they said. They said it's probably because if they were to ban alcohol, then there would be perhaps more violence because people are acting out from, like, what do you call it, withdrawal
Yeah,
symptoms. That's what.
yeah. I mean, there'd likely be some of that. I don't know how much. Uh, See, my thought was more like people will feel more uncomfortable with the lockdown if they don't have their normal amenities.
Hmm. Yeah. I The other thing though with the lockdown, that apparently there has been an increase in domestic violence since the lockdown happened, which
Yeah,
is very sad,
yeah.
and obviously a consequence that nobody really thought through. Which, like, yeah, what would you do with something like that?
I think they're like shelters are still operating. They have some sort of quarantine measures in place, but they're still operating. There's sort of viral social media things going around where people would say, if anyone I know is suffering from domestic violence, you can come quarantine at my place.
Hmm. Are, are people still being arrested?
For
You know,
what?
just like petty crime. Like, are cops allowed to
Yeah,
arrest people?
yeah, I assume so. People are getting tickets for violating quarantine.
Right, that's true.
In
But are
some
they?
ways, that sometimes seem petty, but
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, it is such a strange time. I was reading the news about I haven't seen the latest update, so this is from about a week and a half ago, that the CFL was asking the government for bailout. Like, the CFL, Canadian Football League, was asking for bailout, and I know that some of the airline companies also, I mean, this is in the States, asked for bailout as well.
yeah.
And on the one hand, you feel sympathetic because these are airlines that you've flown on, maybe, but at the same time, you wonder, well, you're a corporation, you're big enough. Why would the government need to bail you out? If you're firing your employees, like, I feel like the government should be bailing out people, human beings, rather than big corporations.
Yeah, well, it depends on what they do. Some of the so like airlines, it can be pretty essential to people's businesses, people's family affairs as well. So, transportation is something that we should definitely have. But yeah, you're right. Um, with financial crashes, um, like the bailing out of the banks in the U.S. back in 2008
Mm.
may have been a pretty unwise decision. Um, just in the effect that it had on lower class people. But yeah, I would think that um, like the purpose of of the economic and the political order is to to secure the common good for its citizens.
Mm.
And if it's not meeting that, then it's by the classical definition of what a state is, it's a failed state.
What's the classical definition of a state?
So I mean, like the republic is, a collection of people who, who just basically live together and they have laws that legislate in favor of the common good. I mean, that's sort of roughly,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you. I know I've changed my mind on this, but you you really do wonder if wow, I don't know how much the government should be um, helping out its citizens. At one point I thought, well, they shouldn't be helping people out at all.
Mhm.
Water should you should fend for your own water. That type of extreme. Like, I'm
Yeah.
coming from extreme stand. Like, you should fend for your own water. But obviously, if you are um, in support of getting humans in general to flourish, as human beings, one of the most fundamental things you need for almost all life is water. And so it would seem to me, at least in my mind, that if at all possible, the state should be providing clean water to its people. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't know if that's is it a positive right? Because if it's positive, was it a right? Because if it's a right, if it's a universal right, then it's a right across time and culture, right? So, is access to clean water, for example, a right, a universal right that we human beings have?
Mm.
I don't know, because if it is a universal right, then you would think that our ancestors had this right.
Yeah. It's, I know that a lot of contemporary political theorists would heavily criticize the idea of rights. What are rights? It sort of comes out of a discussion of what is good.
Hmm.
So a contemporary political discussion is all about rights. What are my personal rights? How does the government need to act or refrain from acting in order to secure those rights?
Hmm.
But more of a people before the the Enlightenment would think of the state much more in terms of what is the human good and how do we organize society so that it attains the common good and human flourishing. So rights aren't these yeah, I don't know, they're not as rarefied, I guess, or reified, sorry. They're not like
What would it be?
objects or
So, but what would it
properties
be?
that we
What would
have.
people have?
So like, they wouldn't even ask the question, is access to water a right
Yeah.
that's had universally across time and culture?
Mm.
They'd think, okay, what is the human good? Um, what sort of means do we have to access it, and how do we best organize, this group of people that are living together in order to attain, um, in order to make sure everyone attains their share of the good, I guess,
It,
their participation in a flourishing
there's no
culture.
like, there's, is there a hierarchy of needs, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is it like that?
Um, Well, could you
Mhm.
expand on that a bit more,
So
maybe?
would it be like, if there's no right, let's just say, going not necessarily the kind of rights that we moderns are talking about, but we're thinking of things that would help human beings flourish. Are we
Mhm.
then categorizing them, the things that would help human beings flourish, assuming that the top of the pyramid is what is like the pinnacle of flourishing, right? You're like
Yeah,
self-fulfillment, whatever the pinnacle is,
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
however
yeah.
you have these hierarchy that allows you, water obviously being one. Without
Mhm.
water you're dead. Without food you're obviously dead. Food,
Yeah,
water, shelter, you can survive without shelter, obviously, to an extent. You can.
right. Yeah, in that case, yeah, there would sort of be a hierarchy of things. Um, yeah, and by the way, before we move on too much, so like right comes from the Latin use, and like use just sort of referred to you know the just society, the just state of society, and that was when it was like good, when you know like human beings have potentials that we need to fulfill in order to be fully human.
Mhm.
um, we need friendship, we need to meet our bodily needs,
Mhm.
um, and societies have similar sorts of needs, and there's only justice done, there's only like a just state of society when those things are met, as much as possible.
Mhm. Mhm. So would that mean that? Yeah, that's interesting. What would that mean though? Is in terms of like contemporary political systems? How would that work? Contemporary political systems
What do you
would,
mean?
like, how, like, if you were to implement something like this, like, would you have to restart everything from the bottom, like, or
um,
can you implement, is it possible to implement this
yeah,
now?
I mean, yeah, there's debates about that. Yeah, so it's people who'd want to draw on classical political theory and sort of get back to more of an idea of a state centered around the common good. I know there's a division where some would draw on, some would want to see transformation just be like, a long march through the institutions. We need to appoint judges who believe in, natural law and the common good.
Hmm.
We need to get doctors who believe in that as well, and people who are willing to act selflessly for this. And there's other people who are a bit more revolutionary in their thinking.
Hmm.
So, I don't know how to attain it. Um, there's others who just think that, well, our current political arrangement is unstable and it will eventually fall. And so we just need to set up all sorts of communities that are intentionally pursuing these types of goods and these types of arrangements. And when it does fall, we'll have these small communities to fall back on,
Hmm.
and they'll be the ones who are ahead of the desolation of the rest of society,
Hmm.
and they'll be the ones from whom the new order emerges.
So I was reading. Nassim Taleb's book Anti-Fragility.
Yeah.
And he made this very interesting point about about why Switzerland is such a successful country, even in terms of like when the whole world's kind of crashing economically.
Hmm.
And he was saying, so people, so I think it's Switzerland and Sweden, but more so Switzerland. And he was saying that part of the reason why, so a lot of people kind of look at it externally and say, oh, it's because, they have a centralized, they're centralized. The government deals with everything. So they're very safe. It's the happiest place, blah, blah, blah. But he was actually saying, yeah, it is centralized, but it's not this way that we in the West would think of centralized it. Because right, like Canada's pretty centralized. So
Yeah.
like we have quotas on milk, how much milk a farmer can produce, quotas on how many eggs can be sold.
Yeah.
Um, like it seems kind of ridiculous to me. But with Switzerland, it's a very small government that does only a few things, and the rest of the rest of Switzerland is its laws and the implementations of the laws and keeping the laws. It's all done by municipals.
Yeah.
Communities are the ones that. And he was just saying the downside of that is that your your neighbor is out there trying to catch you. You know, like if you're doing
Booty.
something that's not part
Right.
of the bylaw, then they'll tell on you, and then not necessarily tell on you to the central government, to the
Yeah.
people elected in the municipal.
But there's more of an accountability to people that that you actually share life with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that within like a lot of classical political theory and like certain types of like Christian social teaching is really emphasized. It's like the idea of subsidiarity, which is like that decisions for the good of a community should be made at the lowest level possible.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it should be the members of the family who decide what's best for the family. It should be the members of the town who decide what's best for the town, and you know yeah, the decisions should be made locally. And the purpose of the executive power, the highest power in the state, is to make very few decisions, and only those that are sort of like an existential challenge to the whole
Mm.
thing.
And that it does sound appealing,
Yeah.
on the front, on the surface. It sounds quite appealing to me, but I don't know. I was just thinking about it, and I wondered, how would you really want to live? I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know, because I'm just thinking of like towns where you have elected officials who think they're doing what's good for the town,
Hmm.
but it's there there's conflict of interest, and they're obviously doing it because it benefits them, and but not the town itself. And so is it, let's say you want to build a new road, right, like a highway coming through, and
Hmm.
the town wants to decide whether they should allow the highway to come through here, just circle around and go through the other town instead, like let the other town deal with it.
Right.
um and it would seem that someone could be like, oh, it's not good for us to go to have this thing come through, because there'll be lots of constructions and businesses will have to kind of slow down, and so we shouldn't do this. But it's very short term thinking. And but if that ends up winning, then the town doesn't have this highway that goes through, perhaps increase tourism. But at the same time, it's like, well, why why shouldn't towns have a say, or the final say in what happens in their own town?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the sort of conflict of interest and not necessarily acting for the good that you're talking about at the local level, that can
Yeah,
take place at the executive level as well
yeah,
and be very destructive. So Nassim Taleb, I think he talks about like fat tail
yeah.
events, and these are uh, yeah. So with probability, there's a number of factors, and sometimes like you can have a crisis that takes out multiple levels of society. And so if you have uh, more things in place to mitigate that destruction, or the consequences. So if you have much more localized society, and you have political decisions being made at the local level, towns which are more economically independent. Your economy is not based on the flourishing of, say, like 5 banks and 10 big businesses. Then if one business fails, it's not going to be detrimental for the whole society. Whereas if one business fails, in a fairly centralized economy, and capitalist economies can be quite centralized with big business, then it could spell widespread destruction in the society.
That's true. If you have even if you were to implement more, give more power to local authorities, let's say here in the area that I'm living, the municipal could be like, okay, everyone has to wear masks. This, like if they're elected, of course, if they're elected, they're like, okay, everyone has to wear masks when you're going out. If you're in this area, you have to wear masks. And it's not like top down; it's bottom up approaches, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're in this community, then you have to wear a mask. Or yeah, I mean something small like that. It would be very helpful instead of and then even going on about the people who've been penalized for being in the park. If you had municipals, if you had if the town had more power, they could say like, okay, in our town, we'll still keep the safe distances, but people can use the parks and nobody's going to get fined.
Yeah.
Or another town could be like, nobody can use the park. Everybody stay indoors. Don't come out. But, that way, we feel like the people have more voice instead of, oh, let's wait for a group of these experts to tell us what to do when they always keep getting, I'm not.
Right.
The centralized decision making is problematic, I'm finding.
Yeah. I mean, you could have a government pass like general principles. People need to keep social distance. They should, stay out of the park. But, because different towns have different, different layouts and whatnot, and different parks are different, you could make much more, you could implement those things at a much lower level. So you could make the practical decision at a lower level, but pass the principle behind the practical decision at a higher level.
This would seem to fit quite well with the, what is it called? Distributism? Is that what you called it? Right?
Yeah.
It would fit quite well with that theory, unless it is that theory.
Yeah, it's something that I would advocate. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? The other thing is this totally unrelated, but I was rereading something that I had written a while ago about the Islamic view of God, and just this Islamic view of God and its relation to the Quran. And so there are these. I think I told you. I think I must have mentioned this to you a while ago. So there are these group of guys called the Mutizalitsas. I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
MU-TU. And they were the 8th and 10th century, around that time. And these are philosophers and theologians, polymath generally, most of them. And they were dealing with how to figure out what to do with the Quran. And so the Quran, for the Muslims, it's the word of God. And if it's the word of God, it's eternally the word of God, right? The Quran is the eternal word of God. So there are these Mutizalatsas. I'm just going to pronounce it that way.
Okay.
So they had this. They were trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with the Quran? Because if it's the word of God, then it's eternally the word of God. But we know that Allah is one, and there is no other, right? There is no God but one. So there can only be one, a strict monotheism. And so, but if the Quran is the word of God, and then it would mean that the Quran would exist eternally in the mind of God.
Right.
If it existed eternally in the mind of God, it coexists with God.
Yeah.
Now you have two coexisting things, Allah and Quran. And so these mutizalats, they're like, okay, we don't know what to do here. So if we say Quran is the word of God and it eternally existed in the mind of God, if it eternally exists in the mind of God, eternally coexisted with God. But that would mean that we don't hold to strict monotheism anymore.
Right.
Allah is not the only one that that eternally existed. So these are Muslim scholars, and they were just like freaking out over this. And so I was reading because I had done research on this, and I was like, oh yeah, that is kind of interesting to think about, because they were criticizing Christians, for Jesus, because Christians hold that Jesus is the eternal Word of God. And so it would seem that, if it is, if a Muslim holds strictly that the Quran is the eternal Word of God, they're kind of in trouble as to what to do with the eternality of the Quran. I know I just randomly brought this up because I was just thinking about it today.
Okay.
But it is interesting to think about. Like, what do you do?
Right. Like if you're not willing to see it as something that's identical to God.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, there's similar problems with certain types of realism about propositions. So, if you say that, I don't know, a triangle is a three-sided figure, and that proposition is analytically true, but the truth value of that proposition is true whether or not there are actually existent triangles, and so that's something that's eternally true. You run into the problem of, well, we have this true proposition. Is it identical to God? And if you say, well, no, it's not. It's not something that's like a part of God's mind or whatever, as some neo-theists don't. Then you have a similar problem of, well, is God what is the relation of this thing to God? Are you a strict monotheist anymore?
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, weird. Anyways, Amos.
What, you're gonna finish on that note?
We'll finish on that note.
Okay.
We'll finish on that note. All right, Amos. I'll see you soon. Peace.
All right. See ya.